Welcome back to my workshop. Now this week I wanted to do a quick project which I've been meaning to do for ages. I'm going to use this letterbox which I had left over from a previous project, and what I'm going to do is make a branding iron. Let's see what happens. So, for those of you that have been to my channel before, you might have seen this project, which was a piston challenge trophy that I made, which left me with this letterbox, or the outside of this letterbox. And this is brass, so I should be able to use it to make this branding iron. And also, in the last video I made, I showed how I did some block printing this design onto a t-shirt. So what I want to do now is combine them both, and I want to use the same process I use for engraving this. I want to do that into the brass, so then I can use that as a branding iron. So the first thing I need to do is a design. So over to the CNC machine. So the first thing I need to do is find out how big my material is, and I'm going to use this section because it already has a boss on here which I can put a thread into. The material is not very thick, so I've got to be very careful here. Let's see how big our material is. So this is 39.5 by 97.2. But this boss is off centre, so I need to find out how far off centre that is, which is approximately 16.7. Right, over to the CNC machine. So now I've got my dimensions, I can get my basic design of the piece of material into the machine. This includes obviously the thickness and everything. Then what I have to do is import the image that I used for my t-shirt imprinting, which is a very basic design. It's got no words in it at all, so it's just basically my logo. Then, because it's going to be quite small, what I was going to do is just basically have initials instead of my full name. So obviously these initials are going to be quite small. So I did some experimentation here with different sizes of font. Didn't really like that one, but I hadn't converted the picture into vectors. So what I needed to do is select the picture and then convert it to a vector. And then what you see me doing here is going into the vectors and cleaning up all the lines. Obviously the more complicated the vectors are, the longer it's going to take to engrave. So what you see me doing here is selecting the different vector groups and zooming in and basically deleting any unnecessary vectors. You can see that I've actually grouped the figure as one vector and the outside is another vector. This makes it easier to manipulate the image. Back to the lettering now, just basically the FTW, which is obviously my initials. Now what I've done is I've done the initials and then I've created a curve. Then what I do is I fit the letters to the curve. This obviously they come out too big to start with, then I need to manipulate them so they're actually the right scale and they actually follow the curve of the engraving. So here you can see me here pulling it into position, find a little adjustment. So I've got to try and imagine what these are going to look like once they're teeny tiny and they've been engraved. Once that's done, I can delete my curve, reposition the figure. Once I'm happy with that, then I'll quickly better save it. Okay, now to my tooling path. Started off looking at using it as a V-carve. This should give me an idea of what the final embossing is going to look like. So in my tool library I adjusted it because I was going to use an engraving bit, which is obviously a very small piece, small bit. So I added that to my library, then did a quick calculation. Oh look, I've still got some odd letters there. What I need to do is get rid of those, easiest way to get rid of them is obviously go back to your drawing and then just not select them. Select the remainder of the picture as vectors, and magically they've gone away. So this was the initial what it was going to look like. Not quite good enough, so I had to do a bit of manipulation here, and then obviously see what it looks like as an engraving. Okay, changing the depth and the texture of the engraving. See what it's going to look like. Reset my toolpaths, have another quick look. Yeah, still not 100% with that. Back to V-carve. Now what I had to do here is obviously, because it's going to be printing to a piece of material, I have to flip the image. So I basically flipped it horizontally, which you can see there. I'm now facing the other way. Another quick preview of what it's going to look like. This is looking more like it. Quick zoom in. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Yeah. Okay, so I think the best thing to do here is probably save the image and convert it obviously to G code, which could then be used in Mach 3 for the actual final engraving. So I think that went relatively successfully. So let's cut my material. Got my Aldi's special cordless angle grinder, cut the material and got it ready for going onto the CNC machine. Now mounting it is with my normal brackets. The problem is, because this is a very thin piece of brass, as you clamp it down it's actually distorted it a little bit, and you can see the end result of that later on in the video, whereas I'm only cutting to a depth of about 0.3 of a millimetre, and if you distort the piece of material by 0.5 millimetre then you end up missing out some of the detail. Started the carving, and while this was carving, just checking it initially, I broke the first piece, my first bit. It snapped off, so that's why you see me changing it again there. This is obviously sped up quite considerably, but yeah, it seemed to be going okay. So while that was doing its thing, I had to think about making the handle for the actual branding iron. So settled with that. So then it was over to the lathe. Set up the lathe. It's actually set up as a sander at the moment, so I changed that, reconfigured that to a normal lathe using a chuck. Selected my piece of wood that I was going to use. Now I was going to use a piece of oak, which is constructed oak. Is out of small blocks of oak. It was actually a kitchen worktop at one point. Then cut it basically into a square, and then onto the lathe and start working it. Now the problem I had here is because it was actually block. There was end grain and normal grain, all facing different directions. So occasionally the chisel would to catch into the piece of wood, which is what you could see there, and that finally ended up with me having to stop the turning and actually use some filler to fill in the holes. You can see me sanding it here, and you can possibly, if you look close enough, you can actually see where it's gouged a couple of bits. So I mixed up some filler here. This is quite good filler. It's very much like body filler. Filled that, let that dry, give it a quick sand off. Obviously the final finish is not over important with this, because it's just a tool, a hand tool, as long as I was quite happy with it. So drilled a hole through the centre. This is where the actual rod is going to come out to screw into the actual branding iron. Nice coat there of wood dye. Let that dry quickly, and then a coat of wax. Use my parting tool, part it off, and then start sanding it. and then putting the insert in, and then this is what happened.
Right, I've had a bit of a disaster. The handle that I was just making for the tool is split here. It's because this is oak. It's oak. It's made out of block board, but it's oak. And I was inserting this into here, and obviously this is into the end grain, and it's just split. So I'm going to try and salvage this by cutting it shorter. See what I can do.
So straight over to the bandsaw, chopped it down a little bit, which is a shame. It's taken the nice looking profile off of the handle. I was going to use the same insert, but this time I flattened it down. Here's a tip: if you're using Eldite, a couple of bits of masking tape on a surface, mix up your Eldite, pull up the masking tape and throw it away. Just check on the CNC machine. Yeah, that's still going. It took hours and hours and hours to do this, but that seems to be going okay. Finally finished. Yeah, it's missing some detail on the top, but I couldn't get it back into the machine in exactly the same position. Okay, trusty angle grinder, cut it to approximate shape, then a bit of sanding grinding around the edge to make it roundish. Then over to my bench grinder, and make it sound as round as I can. At this point it's looking very much like a coin. Put a wire brush in my lathe, and then quickly dressed the edges, and then finally screwed it together. So it's just a piece of rod, a final staining of the bits of actually where I cut it off in the bandsaw, and there's the final thing.
So it's finally done. I managed to salvage the handle. I cut it shorter here. It's not as good as I wanted it to be, but I managed to salvage it for this one. I might make another one because this is actually too thin, but it's there. If you look here, the CNC machine didn't quite get all the detail here, so it's probably not very good, and also the actual embossing needs to be deeper. I've had a quick practice, that's why this is still hot. Let's have another go, and we'll see if I can get used to it. So let's go over here. So take your branding iron, gas torch, it's just a normal butane gas torch, lighter, okay, I don't know how long I'm going to need to hold this on, so let's go for 20 seconds. Although the handle's short, it doesn't seem to transmit the heat into the handle very much, so that's a good thing. Okay, we'll try it on cardboard first. Not enough. Better. A little bit too much. So it works. Let's try it on some hardwood. Piece of oak, the same as the handle. Not so good. Too much. Still not very good. Let's try a softwood. Piece of softwood. So, it's going to take some practice. It's getting it, because it's so thin, it bends as you push onto it. Yeah, a little bit of practice, maybe make another one slightly thicker. But it works. Okay. Okay, just one more last experiment. If I don't want to risk burning all the bits of wood I've made, I've taken a candle in my burner, melt it onto a letter, see if I can emboss it with this. Kind of. Might need a bit of work. So that's it, it's all done. Thank you very much for watching. I don't know how much I'm going to use this, because obviously if I've made something, if I'm not confident about burning holes in it, then I won't use this. If I do use it, I'll practice first. I need to make a thicker one with deeper embossing. And be careful with the handle next time. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and bye.